The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 was achieved through the ruthless and well-planned ethnic cleansing of 750,000 Palestinians. And this colonial logic of conquest, destruction, and expulsion has continued to the present day. Today, about a third of the Palestinian people live under a brutal military occupation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. Israel has stolen land, built Jewish-only settlements, expelled Palestinians, and cornered others into ghettos surrounded by walls, military watchtowers, and checkpoints. 12% of the Palestinian people live inside Israel as third-class citizens. They are subjected to a system of racial discrimination and racist laws that amounts to apartheid, as defined by the United Nations. Half of the Palestinian people continue to live outside Palestine as refugees, denied their right to return to their homes. In 2014, Israel carried out one of its bloodiest ever massacres of Palestinians in the besieged Gaza Strip. More than 2,000 people were killed, a quarter of them children. Israel is only able to maintain its regime of oppression because of the support of international governments and corporations. When those in power refuse to act to stop this injustice, we need a global citizens' response to stand alongside Palestinians in their struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. In 2005, Palestinian civil society came together to issue its call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The appeal calls for concerted nonviolent action to isolate Israel, as was done to apartheid South Africa. We are calling for boycott pressure on Israel until it complies with international law in the following ways: end its occupation and colonization of land seized in 1967, recognize the rights of the Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality, respect the right of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes. The BDS movement has empowered people across the world to take effective action against Israel. Trade unions, student groups, churches, academics, cultural figures, and social movements are joining together to make an impact. And many prominent musicians and artists support the cultural boycott of Israel, refusing to perform there. Israeli business leaders and politicians are warning that the boycott is starting to isolate Israel. In fact, the government is so worried about the strategic threat that BDS poses to their regime of oppression that it's using its enormous resources to undermine the movement. There's a real fear within Israel that it is fast becoming the pariah state that South Africa once was. Get involved in the BDS movement today. Join or set up a campaign in your local area. Pressurize governments and companies to end their support for Israel's regime of injustice. With BDS, we can all make a real contribution to end international complicity in Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people. Thanks for watching.
Hai, Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Kita berjumpa lagi, ni hao vanakkam. Saya Bun. InsyaAllah pada ini kali keempat kita akan bicarakan mengenai isu Palestin. Kali ini kita akan bicarakan mengenai adakah Israel sebuah negara apartheid, dan kita akan menjawab persoalan ini. Kita akan dibangkan certain jawapan yang diberikan oleh jurucakap Israel, basically President of Zionist Federation of Australia. Untuk sesiapa yang menonton, terima kasih kerana menonton. Mungkin boleh like dan subscribe ataupun sharekan tayangan kita. Kita akan kudara insyaAllah setiap Sabtu pertama dan ketiga pada pukul 10 malam pada setiap bulan. Baiklah, sebelum kita bermula, seperti biasa kita akan bicarakan mengenai isu-isu terkini di Palestin. Dengan itu saya akan persilakan Brother Azam untuk menyampaikan berita terkini daripada Palestin. Ya Azam, apa khabar?
Okey, Alhamdulillah baik. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okey Azam, mungkin boleh teruskan dengan presentation awak, apa yang terkini?
Boleh dah share screen ke? Okey.
Ya.
Okey, thank you. Okey, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Jadi sesi pertama kita akan kongsikan 2-3 berita tentang Palestin dalam usaha kita sama-sama memandaikan diri kita untuk apa cerita Palestin ni, dan saya hari ini akan berkongsi hanya 3 perkara. Okey, yang pertama, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang pertama, pepatah Melayu kata siapa makan cili dia rasa pedas. So hari ini kita nak cerita tentang negara Chili. Di Chili, yang kanan tu dia punya Perdana Menteri Gabriel Boric. So berita terbaru hari Khamis baru ni, dia telah menolak sesi duta dari negara apartheid untuk tauliah lah. Maknanya yang sebelah kiri tu nama dia saya boleh Google lah nama dia, malas nak sebut pun. Jadi duta apartheid ni, kalau kita PM Boric dah tolak, jadi kalau duta apartheid untuk kita, mungkin kita teringat JWW Bush yang orang negara kita tolak, ataupun sama juga siapa yang masih ingat cerita Mak Kilau, tentunya wakil-wakil British ni kan yang kita tolak sebab dia telah datang dan menjajah negara kita. Jadi sebabnya apa cerita kenapa sebabnya? Jadi sebabnya PM tu tolak ialah baru lagi minggu ni juga seorang pemuda 17 tahun, Uday Salah, dia juga dibunuh lah. Memang macam biasa dalam usaha Zionis nak rampas tanah, berlakulah pertemuan antara rakyat yang menduduki tanah mereka yang sah melawan penjajah. So kita kena ingat satu perkara, rakyat ni berhak ada defend hak masing-masing macam juga kita orang Malaysia lawan penjajah British zaman dulu. Jadi tak ada masalah pun untuk kita menentang penjajah, sama ada di Malaysia, di Palestin, di tempat negara lain, South Africa apartheid, di Ireland dan sebagainya. Semua baik. Jadi itu yang pertama. Yang kedua, saya nak kongsi satu benda saya rasa fakta menarik. Bun ada ke tak ada? Bun ada apa-apa alergik tak Bun kalau pemakanan? Macam mana Bun?
So far so good. I can
Bagus.
no problem. Yeah.
Ini kita nak cerita tentang satu buah-buahan yang ada orang alergik. Beritanya ialah di Israel mereka alergik dengan buah tembikai. Ini cerita dia. So cerita dia boleh tengok kat gambar tu yang bottom right, bendera Palestin ada 4 color tu. Jadi satu simbol melawannya penjajah ni ialah mereka bawa buah tembikai. Sebab kalau nak pacak bendera apa semua ni, memang dia tak bagilah. Sedangkan kita punya negara, kita nak pacak bendera, apa salahnya kan? Tapi tentunya akan diganggu oleh tentera penjajah. Jadi salah satu simbol resistance untuk pejuang kemerdekaan, mereka gunakan temikai. Boleh tengoklah dalam gambar tu kan, color dia sikit lebih kurang. Jadi itu yang kedua untuk hari ini. Yang ketiga, yang terakhir, baik. Yang terakhir ialah so ini satu berita saya pun nak ajak semua pendengar. Saya rasa tentunya kalau dalam 2 tahun lepas, masa biasalah dia Israel duk berdil Gaza tu, trending tagline Israel koyak satu dunia, kita asyik perang di social media so memang trending, memang baguslah orang rakyat kita ada kesedaran. Now what is next lepas Israel koyak, apa lagi yang kita boleh ceritakan, sebab ini social media tentunya ada message yang mungkin kita boleh sampaikan. Jadi apa yang kita sarankan kepada pendengar kita telah letak link di Facebook BDS bahan-bahan untuk boleh digunakan untuk share di social media. Masing-masing boleh share personal page, kumpulan punya page NGO ke apa ke, ada macam-macam bahan yang sesuai kat situ. Mungkin share Twitter ke, Facebook ke, IG ke, terpulang lah. Jadi kita teruskan, tak boleh berhenti melawan penjajah apartheid ni ya, sebab yang antara yang terbaru, 2 sekolah dia nak tutup ya, dia nak robohkan, dia nak ambil tanah macam biasa. Asyik curi tanah. Dan ini sejak tahun 1948 sampai sekarang dia tak berhenti. Dan inilah yang kita perlu lawan, penjajah apartheid ni. Jadi Bun, sekian saja dari saya. Itu berita, 3 berita. Over to you.
Okey, terima kasih Dr. Azam. Okey, itu dia 3 perkara menarik daripada Palestin yang ingin dikongsikan. Jadi semua information tu kita akan postkan di Facebook BDS Malaysia. Boleh Google saja, pergi masuk Facebook dan cari tab saja BDS Malaysia. Akan dapat atau BDS Movement Malaysia. Okey, mungkin lepas ni kita boleh makan tembikai masa kita buat show kat sini. Dan BDS ni memang banyak kempen, kita buat advocacy bagi pengajaran kepada bagi information kepada public, especially Malaysia dekat sini, dan juga ada kempen-kempen yang kita akan share from time to time, macam kat belakang saya ni. Kita kempen untuk UEFA, kita sign ramai-ramai untuk UEFA kick out apartheid, basically kick out Israel lah, mengamalkan benda tu. Kita ada kempen, nanti yang last time kita ada kempen tenis. Yang ni macam Brother Azam cakap, I think di Masafir Riyata yang macam diambilkan tanah orang kampung Palestin untuk dibuatkan firing range. So they use all sort of excuses untuk merampas tanah Palestin sedikit demi sedikit. Baiklah, kita punya perbincangan kita pada kali ini. Okey, buat yang baru menonton jangan lupa untuk share, subscribe, benda tu semua free. Ia banyak membantu dan mungkin orang lain. Boleh komen, kita punya perbincangan memang saya letak kat situ, diskusi santai. Kalau awak ada pandangan mengenai satu perkara, boleh sharekan dekat situ. Dia mungkin boleh menaikkan kita punya reach out to other people dengan algorithm. Just share quality tu okey ke tak, sound. Boleh sharekan pendapat awak tentang satu perkara. Baiklah, untuk sesi utama kita pada kali ini, kita punya kempen tadi, apa dia punya tajuk tadi? Israel bukan sebuah negara apartheid. So, menjawab dakyah Israel. Dengan itu kita akan menjemput Dr. Roland jauh daripada UK untuk bersama dengan kita. Dipersilakan Dr. Roland. Hai Dok, apa khabar?
Apa khabar?
How's London, sejuk ke? Now? It's autumn.
Well, the thing is, it's everyone cakap mengenai kematian Ratu Elizabeth. Bukan.
Still. Tadi I baru tengok berita, they're not, banyak people, country mau keluar daripada under the dominion of King Charles. Ada the Commonwealth countries, I think ada 15 countries kan under England as their punya constitutional monarch lah. So people think I want to get away lah. not under Charles, only under the Queen. They love the Queen. But before we go with that, kita akan tengok sedikit kita punya video untuk perbincangan kita pada kali ini. Anda semua duduk kat sana, boleh komen apa pendapat anda. Ini basically bila Amnesty International report ni keluar pada 1 bulan Februari 2022. Jadi memang mereka menolak dengan sekeras-kerasnya, dan dia punya line of tolak, dia punya hujah-hujahnya basically serupa. Kita akan tonton.
Accused Israel of being an apartheid state. Its newly released 278-page report found Israel has maintained, quote, a system of oppression and domination over Palestinians within Israel's borders and the occupied territories. Amnesty highlighted the regular eviction of Palestinian families from their homes under the illegal settlement program, as well as the restriction of movement and lack of political rights given to Arabs.
It's not the act of violence. I have seen violence before. It is the cruelty of the system, the intricate, evolving administration of control, dispossession and inequality, the incredible, detailed bureaucratization upon which that system is predicated.
Amnesty joins a growing list of rights groups which have made such a determination, which includes Human Rights Watch and other similar agencies. Now, Israel rejects any allegation of apartheid. Its foreign minister says the report is false, biased and anti-Semitic. Joining me now for his thoughts on this report is the president of the Zionist Federation of Australia, Jeremy Liebler. Jeremy, thanks for your time. I know you've been critical of the broader findings in this Amnesty International report, but can Israel learn anything from what's been uncovered in this analysis?
Well, Kieran, firstly, thanks for having me. It's difficult to learn something from a report that in effect calls for your destruction or national suicide. So I think there is certainly room in the debate. Israel is not beyond reproach. Israel is not beyond criticism. It is certainly not perfect. It is a democracy like Australia, like the United States, that has its imperfections. But this report does not give Israel any option to be legitimate in the eyes of Amnesty International unless it literally commits national suicide and ceases to be a Jewish state. So it's quite difficult, I think, in this situation.
One of the glaring issues, it's been a major issue for a number of years now, is this issue of settlements. Does that make Israel a bigger target?
Look, Israel lives in a very complicated and difficult part of the Middle East. And settlements and the discussion, be it criticism, has a role to play in finding a resolution to, what feels like a never-ending conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. But what we need is nuanced, thoughtful and balanced interrogation of these issues. And if you take this report, it was launched yesterday in
Bun, you mute. Bun tak
Okay,
dengar.
sorry guys. I think kita punya discussion, kita punya perbincangan daripada video yang ni daripada short video. Video dalam 3 minit, 4 minit. Kita akan mainkan dan kita akan cut daripada semasa ke semasa dan kita akan perbincangkan. Saya suka kalau macam
Rights groups which have made such a determination, which includes
kalau tengok daripada sekejap ya.
Biased and anti-Semitic. Joining me now for...
Okay, ini dah nak masuk daripada, basically kalau macam kita dengar tadi, Agnes Kalamat, basically dia kata, it's not because of the acts of violence. Dia kata she has seen plenty of violence all over the world, being the Secretary General of Amnesty International. Tapi dia kata the systematic of oppression. Macam benda bila systematic oppression ni of an oppression and domination within Israel borders and the occupied territories, and regular eviction of Palestinians from their homes under illegal settlement, and the lack of freedom of movement and the lack of political rights. And dia punya system oppression, basically benda tu is not macam kalau violent, benda tu probably you kill people probably ada satu masa yang pendek. Tapi kalau the systematic oppression by an expression ni over 70, 100 years, this is something dia rasa macam kalau benda tu bukan apartheid, kalau benda tu bukan oppression, itu yang saya rasa dia is quite profound. So what do you think? Dekat sini, Roland, you want to comment on that?
I mean, I don't think there's anything to comment on that because it's all documented in Amnesty International reports, Amnesty International, but not in other reports too, Human Rights Watch, the U.S. Anthropological Association report on Palestine Israel. I mean, they all are full of basically where Israel does this, where basically it's obvious that it's not just random people taking guns and shooting other people. It's the government, it's the ideology. It's all documented. And even when that guy responded, he didn't deny that there's a system. In fact, he agrees that there's a system of Jewish supremacy. He just thinks that Jewish supremacy in historical Palestine between the River Jordan and Mediterranean Sea is legitimate. So that Zionist Federation of Australia guy, he didn't deny that there's this system. He just thinks that the system is legitimate.
Okay. Azam mungkin nak komen kalau macam tengok daripada Jeremy, kita tunjuk Jeremy Libler ni, the president of Zionist Federation of Australia. First thing yang dia comment is basically, how can they learn anything when the reports basically calling for a destruction of Israel? Of course, in certain sense, it cannot really be a democratic country or fair country at the same time you being an apartheid state or region. So, what do you think of that, Azam?
First kali saya rasa pepatah kita kata menegakkan benang yang basah lah. Jadi apa yang dia sebut tu memang karut dan mengarut. Kita tak boleh terima pun. Apa yang sering diulang-ulang ialah dia selalu sebut the right of Israel to exist. Untuk siapa-siapa manusia semua ada right to exist kan, tak ada masalah pun. However, apa yang BDS tekankan ialah nombor 3 yang kat atas ni, belakang ni yang kita selalu sebut-sebut ialah refugees right of return. Sebab mereka selalu duk rampas tanah, macam tadi yang kita sebut Masafir Yatta, yang sebelum ni Sheikh Jarrah, dia tak berhenti-henti. Jadi saya nak ingatkan satu benda untuk pendengar kita. Konflik Israel-Palestin bukan bab agama, tapi itu hanya dakyah sebelah sana, dan ini ialah tentang rampasan tanah yang berterus-terusan. Okey, Bun?
Okey. Kita tengok cek tadi
On this report is the president of the Zionist Federation of Australia, Jeremy Liebler. Jeremy, thanks for your time. I know you've been critical of the broader findings in this Amnesty International report.
Sekejap. Okey. Satu benda saya nak cakap.
Learn anything from
Saya nak share. Okey, satu benda kalau macam ada Peter Slizak, saya dengar dia buat satu talk dengan Azra Banu. One thing that Australia akan buat, the Zionist Federation of Australia, every time ada benda criticize Israel, ramai-ramai dia akan call all the news outlet, all the news media untuk hentam. So I think we should do the same lah untuk to counter. Dia memang akan pressure media. Kalau tengok dia media apa? Yes. Teruskan.
what's been uncovered in this analysis.
Ini dia first point tadi.
Well, Kieran, firstly, thanks for having me. It's difficult to learn something from a report that in effect calls for your destruction or national suicide. So I think there is certainly room in the debate. Israel is not beyond reproach. Israel is not beyond criticism. It is certainly not perfect. It is a democracy like Australia, like the United States.
Okay, this is the second common line. Kalau tengok, dia kata Israel is not perfect. Macam Azam, kau pun ada buat salah. Roland, you also buat salah. You also buat salah. And they equate that to Australia. Australia is a democratic country, to US. Of course, democratic, you can be criticized. It's not perfect. Tapi to admit, just like, they have some flaws. It's fair. Tapi you tak boleh macam comment until dia tak boleh exist. So dia kata kalau dia admit to apartheid, basically it's national suicide and Israel takkan exist in this world lah. I mean basically it's very harmful to them lah, in that sense. You want to say anything on that basis, Roland? Roland, you got anything to that?
Sorry, I was mute. Apartheid South Africa use the same argument too. Like they said, if we say we are apartheid, we end apartheid, it'll be suicide for the white South Africans. We can see what the result is. It's not suicide for white South Africans. I mean, I have white South African friends too, and they are not obviously dead. They're still living. So it's bullshit, and it's like, and you can also go see what the Palestinians say. The Palestinians don't say we want to kill all the Jews. They say we want to be able to live in our homeland as most people around the world can live. So
Yep.
there's no suicide or whatever. It's bullshit.
Yep. Thank you, Roland. Yes, that's basically BDS punya stand. Basically, what we are championing, apa yang kita minta adalah untuk semua rakyat, sama ada Palestin ataupun Israel, mana-mana rakyat pun dulu kita boleh hidup bebas seperti mana-mana rakyat di dalam sebuah negara yang bebas. Itu yang kita perjuangkan di BDS. Azam, you want to add anything? Okay, lagi satu, kalau untuk orang yang dekat luar, yang first round last week kita dah bincangkan apakah Israel sebuah negara apartheid yang Dr. Roland telah perincikan, definekan. Ini bukan macam dia kata macam Malaysia pun negara apartheid juga. So there is a proper international definition under ICED, International Convention of Elimination of Racism and Discrimination.
No, bukan ICED. It's the
Rome
International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid.
So because the
Ini,
one
ini bukan ICED. It's a completely different one. This one, the Apartheid Convention, is much older than ICED. Sejak tahun 70-an.
Yeah. But basically the whole thing is governed under three treaties, Rome Statute, that the one that you said, and the last is basically ICED from the Amnesty International report that I read this afternoon. So that's basically it's a proper definasi ya. Kalau buat yang mungkin orang Malaysia yang tak berapa tahu pasal isu apartheid ni, is basically sama macam apa yang telah terjadi di Afrika Selatan. Tapi mengikut mendiang Desmond Tutu, salah seorang pejuang apartheid di South Africa, yang apartheid di Palestin ni lebih teruk sebab dia ada military military demolition ke war whatnot, oppression on the Palestine. Azam,
Bun, boleh tambah sikit. Mungkin kita bagi beberapa contoh. Ada banyak sebenarnya senarai undang-undang yang pelik, berat sebelah dan memberi simbol bahawa Israel itu apartheid. Contoh, yang pertama tahun 1950 dia buat Akta Law of Return. So Law of Return maknanya untuk sesiapa yang berbangsa Yahudi boleh je datang dan mereka akan diberi tempat tinggal dan sebagainya. Tapi Law of Return ni bermasalah lah tentunya, tidak demokratik seperti mana speaker mengarut Zionis tadi sebut, which is kenapa Law of Return untuk Zionis boleh balik ke tempat yang dia panggil Israel dan rampas harta atau tempat tinggal orang lain. Sedangkan yang nombor 3 yang ke atas tu tentang refugee dari Palestin pula, mereka dihalau. Mereka dihalau yang dia telah duduk situ, tanah family dia turun-temurun, tiba-tiba dihalau. Tentunya ini yang satu undang-undang yang berat sebelah, tak adil, tak patut. Ada banyak lagi lah, mungkin absentee property law. Dia tentunya bila Nakbah tahun 48 macam mana rakyat Palestin dihalau, tentunya mereka tak boleh kembali ke rumah dia. Dia kata absentee property law, okey, dia orang dah tak ada, jom kita buat harta macam rumah kita. Ini macam teringat pula cerita P. Ramlee, dia pergi 3 Abdul tu. Tapi itu barangkali macam tu lah kot. Tiba-tiba buat harta rumah orang, dia jadi harta dia lah pula. Tapi lagi teruk dari P. Ramlee lah, just to be clear. Okay, Bun.
Thank you Azam. Kalau macam nak cakapkan tadi, last time ada Prof. Nazari kata ada some people say about 95 specific laws, tapi tak didetailkan. Ini adalah basically 280 page Amnesty International punya report on Israel's and apartheid against Palestine. Kalau kita tengok dia punya report, closed system of domination and crimes against humanity, satu sistem yang zalim untuk mendominasikan satu bangsa Israel, dan basically adalah jenayah kemanusiaan. Kalau Amnesty International, untuk siapa yang tak tahu, adalah satu pertubuhan hak asasi manusia antarabangsa, ini 10 juta manusia yang support. Mereka buat pelbagai kempen di seluruh dunia. Kalau macam nak tengok yang apa yang Dr. Azam kata tadi, ada semua dalam dia punya scope. Kalau macam kita tengok dia punya satu, dia punya definition international law tu, apakah apartheid tu. Dia kalau macam Israel oppression and domination, dia punya kezaliman ini dia start dengan dia mesti ada niat. Dia mesti benda tu sistematik. Lepas tu dia macam mana dia pisahkan rakyat Palestin daripada yang duduk di Gaza, tak boleh pergi ke West Bank, daripada West Bank tak boleh pergi ke Jerusalem, tak boleh pergi ke Israel. Dia tak boleh kahwin, tak boleh macam Azam tadi dia bagi simple example lah. Macam mana orang Jew, orang Yahudi daripada satu dunia, daripada US ke daripada Russia kepada mana-mana pun boleh pulang kepada Israel, terdapat automatic citizenship of Israel. Tapi orang Palestin yang telah ditendang keluar daripada tahun 98 hingga 1967, dia tak ada hak untuk pulang balik ke rumah. Right of return. Ini salah satu tuntutan daripada BDS. Macam mana orang yang tak ada connection, tak beranak dekat situ tanah Palestin, boleh automatik terus jadi macam rakyat Israel ataupun rakyat Malaysia. Tapi rakyat Malaysia yang telah macam dekat Ukraine, pas ada war tu, dia terpaksa keluar daripada bumi kerana peperangan, tak ada hak untuk balik untuk tengok ke rumah. Dan rumahnya pun telah dibulldozerkan oleh Caterpillar dan Hyundai. Dan mereka tak boleh balik dan dia tak boleh claim. Dan dia buat pelbagai-bagai jenis undang-undang. Dia kalau macam kat sini dia ada kalau macam system operation, dia ada legal macam mana dia buat dari segi undang disposition of land and property. Berbagai-bagai yang macam Azam cakap tadi adalah salah satu undang-undang yang buat land expropriation laws and policies. Kalau macam tanah tu dah lama tak diduduki, mereka boleh ambil dan boleh buat kepada dia punya simple logic ni macam mana sebelum Israel wujud. Dan tengok kat sini. So negara Israel wujud 1948, masa dia declare negara tu. Tanah di Palestin tu diduduki oleh 70% orang Palestin. Dan private land, tanah apa tu? Yalah, bukan tanah kerajaan, masih tak ada kerajaan lagi, 90% dimiliki orang Palestin. Orang Israel masa tu ada 6% population dan ada 30% tanah private yang telah difundkan oleh Jewish punya, oleh Zionist punya movement lah. Dan macam mana benda tu sekarang boleh totally reverse. Palestin tinggal 10% dia punya tanah dan basically kalau macam tengok itu dah jadi 90%. Okay, anything you want to add, Roland? Azam? On that thing? We shall go. Kita tengok tadi video.
Imperfections. But this report does not give Israel any option to be legitimate in the eyes of Amnesty International unless it literally commits national suicide and ceases to be a Jewish state. So it's quite difficult, I think, in this situation.
One of the glaring issues, it's been a major issue for a number of years now, is this issue of settlements. Does that make Israel a bigger target?
Look, Israel lives in a very complicated and difficult part of the Middle East. And settlements and the discussion, be it criticism, has a role to play in finding a resolution to, what feels like a never-ending conflict between Israel and the Palestinians.
This is also quite common dakyah yang dibuat oleh Israel, Roland. Basically kalau cakap pasal Israel, of course it's very complicated issue. Very complicated, especially kalau dia nak cuba obscurekan dia punya debate tu, dia punya perbualan very complicated, dia kata defend and dia pasal benda tu. And slowly dia ambil tanah Palestin. Tanah yang dekat West Bank yang sepatutnya Palestin pun dia dah buat settlement makin lama makin banyak. Dan the only time the international community memang banyak kecam The last time I think Obama sebelum dia leave office, sebulan sebelum leave office, baru dia kecam the illegal settlement in the West Bank, the occupied territory. Do you want to add to that, Roland?
Yeah, I mean, well, dia kata Israel can be criticized like any country, tapi settlement is the main, according to international law, to Oslo Accords, the settlements clearly violate all of that. So that is the international law, human rights, liberal UN criticism of Israel. It's not even a militant Hamas criticism of Israel. It's international law criticism. The settlements clearly illegal by any definition of international law. So dia kata Israel can be criticized, tapi when Israel is criticized using just standard international law criticisms, dia kata, oh, it's a very complicated issue. It's a complicated conflict between the Palestinians and Israel. When pretty much like Francesca Calabresi, the current UN Special Rapporteur, said, like, of course, Palestinians might have done specific incidents that violate international law. But that does not change the fact that Israel is the main violator and the Palestinians have a right to resist. Because Israel is violating so many international laws. And specifically, even things that Israel itself has signed. They signed the Oslo Accord. The settlements are a clear violation of the Oslo Accords.
Yeah, after the Oslo Accord, the settlement is increased, I think, threefold, daripada 200,000 sampai ke 600,000, until now. And they slowly, macam dia kata, you bergaduh, you to negotiate, but at the same time you eat the pizza too. They're fighting over pizza, but at the same time they eat the pizza too. Now tinggal makin lama makin kurang. They just like the status quo and slowly they eat the pizza.
Okay, Bun, nak tambah sikit.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, satu perkara yang disebut speaker tadi tu, ini saya teringat kalau kita panggil kebat kemahiran berfikir ataupun tentang apa yang disebut tu fallacy, red herring fallacy. Maknanya dia sebut nampak logik tapi sebenarnya mengarut, which is dia sebut tentang negara bangsa, Jewish state. So negara bangsa ni tak ada yang pelik pun, memanglah okey. Banyak je negara bangsa, Jepun ke, Jerman ke, semuanya ada banyak negara bangsa. Dan itu tidaklah siapa-siapa kata jadi bermasalah pun. Yang masalahnya ialah apabila hak manusia lain di negara tersebut dinafikan, which is mungkin sekarang ni saya rujuk kepada nombor 2 pula dekat situ, di mana rakyat yang terkepung, yang terjajah itu dinafikan haknya. Mungkin Gaza tidak dijajah tapi dikepung, jadi mereka tak bebas untuk bergerak, nak pergi mancing ikan pun tak boleh. Tentang di semenanjung di tebing barat pula, mereka dinafikan hak mereka, ataupun di kawasan yang dipanggil Israel proper, mereka juga tak ada hak lah. Maknanya sekolah tak ada kemudahan. Sekolah ada tapi dia sokongan ataupun funding tu tak banyak, hospital dan sebagainya. Untuk orang selain daripada Yahudi, mereka ni tiada hak, tidak di-treated macam manusia. Mereka tidak dilayan seperti manusia. Jadi itu yang mana satu message daripada BDS yang kita nak sampaikan. Okey, Bun? Bun, mute.
Okey, untuk orang di luar mungkin tak berapa faham. Orang di Palestin tu tak semua boleh pergi masuk ke Baitul Maqdis. Tak boleh semua daripada Gaza pergi ke West Bank, daripada West Bank nak pergi ke Baitul Maqdis. Dia tak bebas. Dia kena dapatkan clearance daripada Israel. Kalau nak bagi daripada military lah, daripada askar. Kalau askar tak bagi lah. Memang semua orang ada setengah tu memang tak pernah masuk pun. dalam satu era. In fact, kalau macam ada satu video dia tengok, ada satu family tu terpisah antara mak dengan keluarga dia. Dia boleh tengok, dia boleh lambai daripada jauh kan. Because dia ada, masing-masing dia ada empat pasport, macam IC. Ada satu dekat ialah Israel proper, macam Azam kata, yang masa selepas 6/7 dah melekat ada 20% orang kat situ. Dia ada rakyat Palestin di Gaza, dia ada rakyat Palestin di West Bank, dan dia ada rakyat Palestin di Jerusalem. Ini 4 pasport, 4 IC yang berlainan colour, dan dia punya berlainan kebebasan dia untuk bergerak dan untuk buat satu benda, untuk bekerja ke, untuk buka bank account ke, semua berbeza. Dia memang dipisahkan. Jadi kalau macam Roland cakap, Azam cakap tadi, basically right of return, UN Resolution 194, yang two-state solution, is it 252? I couldn't remember. Tapi itu strings of UN resolution yang basically Israel tak kisah, Roland. Basically they can act with impunity. If I'm mistaken, about 40.
I mean, like, Israel likes to, like, Zionists like to argue that they are recognized under international law by the UN resolutions, and that's true. But then they always ignore that the same UN resolutions also recognize the Palestinians as a people. I mean, if Israel wants to argue that they are recognized under international law and UN resolutions, that's true. But then the same international laws also recognize the Palestinians as a people with the same right to self-determination, which includes the right of return. So, they use the UN resolutions that support them, then just ignore all the UN resolutions that don't support them.
Yeah, I mean, like even in our local politics, whenever the law suits them, they're winning the law is good. Whenever the law is against them, the law is not so good, the judge is biased, the judiciary, that kind of thing. So this is, to me, this Israel logic. Whenever the law benefits them, the law is okay. Whenever the law prosecute them, the law is just just biased just unfair in that sense. This is, to me, the Israel logic. So whatever that thing, kalau tengok even macam the Declaration of Independence 1948, even masa British bagi pun, they can have a state of their own, but without prejudice to the rights of Palestinian people to live as a free people. Betul lah. You boleh duduk kat situ because basically they were persecuted. Kalau kita nak go back further pun, mungkin kita tanya kenapa Europe benci sangat dengan orang Yahudi. Basically dengan masa KJ tu, basically they were living all over. In fact, they are better treated under Muslim countries. Orang Arab okay je masa tu. Betul Azam? Masa they were persecuted in Spain and during the Reconquista, they came over to Turkey, to all Islamic countries. And I cannot fathom untuk orang yang is consistently being persecuted, for being Jew, but at the same time they do it to other people. So I cannot brain this kind of the Israeli logic. How could you do that? Azam, you want to add anything to that?
Well, that is always the point. Mereka ni minta simpati, kononnya dimangsakan oleh Hitler dan tentera-tentera Hitler. Well, that did happen lah. Kita tak kata benda tu tak berlaku kan. Having said that, dia pula lah jadi Hitler dan Nazi lah. Apa yang Hitler Nazi buat tu memang dia pula jadi do the same. Benda tak patut, and macam Bun cakap lah, kita pun tak faham kenapa mereka ni macam ni. Okay Bun?
Tak, tapi to be fair, there are many Jews, who's that? That's Kurt Russell, sebenarnya that actor. So basically they see the same logic, I mean, if there is anyone yang akan cakap against oppressions, against cruelty, is supposed to be the Jew, because they are the most persecuted people for the whole entire of human history, So
sorry, kena tambah sikit kat sini Bun. kita tengok research daripada pakar-pakar tentang hak asasi manusia mengatakan kalau sebenarnya rujukan siapa the most prosecuted person sekarang ni selalunya akan jatuh kepada orang Palestin, sebab Palestin ni simbol resistance. Contoh kalaunya yang 2 tahun lepas George Floyd tentang hak orang kulit hitam, mereka akan cepat associate ataupun bendera Palestin pun tiba-tiba ada sama. Mereka rasakan ini yang perjuangan yang ditindas dan Palestin ni menjadi simbol yang celebrated by semua orang. Itu George Floyd dulu di Ferguson, US juga. Tapi negara-negara lain pun samalah. Macam mana mungkin hak mereka di Australia, aktiviti yang kita panggil settler colonialism. Settler colonialism
Azam, I
ni,
think that yang tadi you cakap betul, because of course satu benda yang especially people kat Europe yang kita tak boleh nak fikir, nak hadamkan is settler colonialism. Kita dah mereka 1957, orang semua dah tak ada dah. Nak colonize. Why they still there, man? Until the 20th century, you know? They're still keeping settler colonialism until now. I mean, that's why especially people in Europe yang dah banyak colonize the global south ni. Yes, Roland.
The thing is, Malaysia was not a settler colony in that the British and then
They settled down. Okay.
the Portuguese, the Dutch, they wanted Malaysia because of our location, basically, because China is to the east, India is to the west. All the ships that want to pass, we didn't have to pass through Selat Melaka. So,
that's true. Oh, sorry, mine. We only colonize. We don't like settler colonialism. Basically, like America.
There are one form of colonialism is resource colonialism, and and then the other form was settler. It was a term basically that was in. There's an Aboriginal Australian activist called Patrick Wolfe. He came up with that term, and actually he's not an academic or anything. He's an activist and. He actually never saw any he died quite young, and he died young and very poor. Because like many Aboriginal Australians, he was very poor. He came up with the term to describe the situation that was affecting him and his people specifically.
Yeah.
And then
that's the most recent one. Yang paling baru memang dekat Australia lah. That settler colonialism punya contoh. Until now dia orang cuba rectify benda tu. Yang of course yang dia kata dia mention US pun super juga, and what happened to Red Indian. Basically dah pupus, datang orang British ni masuk kat sana. We try to mainkan sikit lagi, then probably we just wrap up this whole thing. Kalau tak ada apa, kita tengok.
Oh yeah. So one thing about like the Nazi thing and why, I mean, even the Israeli in 1948, an Israeli cabinet minister himself said, his name's Aharon Sizzling, he himself said after Israel conducted the Deir Yassin massacre, where at least 240 Palestinian villagers were killed, he himself said, now we too have behaved like the Nazis. So it's not even us saying this. Israeli cabinet minister in 1948 himself said this.
Okay. Kan 10 minutes before 10, I just habiskan. Ada satu benda yang I think this one, their response is basically the same. It's just that how they want to,
what we need is nuanced, thoughtful and balanced interrogation of these issues.
Yeah. Okay.
Current government has Mansour Abbas as a senior minister in the government from an Arab Islamist party. The issue of settlements needs to be resolved in the context of a negotiated two-state solution. And the truth is, Kieran, we don't have to actually look too far to understand what that resolution looked like. In the Camp David discussions, they pretty much got us close, and Israel was prepared to abandon many settlements. Some of the other major settlement blocks that are effectively, attached to Israel would become part of Israel. There would be land swaps in respect of other parts of Israel to compensate to make a
Ini masih
started
lagi
in the 1990s.
the two-state solution ni. Okay, satu je yang orang yang dia biasa gunakan tadi is basically, they said they have the building blocks, but at the same time they are eating, they're taking away, bit by bit, and basically it becomes from 200,000 become to 600,000 now, and they're still taking it. Macam it's what happened in Sheikh Jarrah as well, Masafir Yatta, yang what happened now. But now it's gradually, but they're taking it. Sebab kalau ambil banyak-banyak, nanti orang bising. So dia harassing, dia ambil sikit-sikit. And the last thing, kalau macam dia tengok, dia kata report of Amnesty International, kalau dia tengok kat ujung tu, dia ada cakap was launched in Lebanon. Ini biasa digunakan. Lebanon yang deny the Palestinian basic human rights of working, of voting, of owning property, and basically dia kata Israel is the only democratic country in the Middle East. Lebanon apa semua tak. So how do you respond to this kind of people? Roland, Azam, you want to say anything?
Well, yang pertama, isu ni sejak tahun 48, jadi memanglah kompleks. Apabila dengarnya naratif atau hasbara ataupun propaganda daripada dia, macam-macam yang dia sebut tadi tu, Camp David lah, Oslo Accord, macam-macam. Jadi kalau betul lah kita ni berminat juga nak lawan naratif Israel online ke offline ke, kita pun kena ambil cakna dan ambil faham, which is yang penting sekali satu mesej saya. Satu apa pun perjanjian di mana-mana pun langsung dia tak akan ikut. Dia mungkin janji semuanya dan dia akan pusing-pusing dengan naratif yang mengarut to state solution yang kita tahu makin mustahil dan yang kita kami delay tactics. Inilah yang yang cuba dia sampaikan kepada kita sebenarnya. Menipu tak berhenti. Bun?
Okay. That thing is very betul. I mean, satu benda apa yang BDS buat ni basically kena consistent ni satu dunia pergerakan akar umbi untuk pressure Israel. Because they don't have the incentive to do anything, Because basically now they own the whole of Palestine. They basically they don't care about whatever the international community is saying because the US is behind them, and they can take bit by bit, You want to say blah 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 blah, they just they just don't care. That's why what we are doing in BDS, of course, war is one thing, but I think there are plenty of civil resistance that kita semua sebagai rakyat even Malaysia satu dunia boleh buat. Kita nak setengah tu just your simple signature. Macam kalau tengok tadi ada campaign juta rakyat boycott apartheid Israel. Kita kena bagi pressure. So without pressure, they don't have any incentive to even go to the, to the table and discuss and concede. I mean, and kalau ikut Ilan Pape, seorang sejarawan Israel, kalau nak satu proper settlement tu bukan Israel yang beritahu, okay, nak ambil ni tanah kau. Ini dia. Ataupun macam Umar Baguti, BDS punya founder kata, untuk settlekan satu benda tu, dia kena victim tu cakap macam mana benda tu nak settle. Betul Roland? I rob your bank account, I rob your house. Dia kata, no Roland, I just give you your bicycle buruk . You don't claim anything else. So is that logical? Is that no? So it's up to the victim to ask what is the fair compensation, apa yang adil. Barulah benda tu macam kita punya tagline, tanpa ada keamanan, tanpa keadilan. Okay, cuma ada satu last yang nak tanya you Roland, in a Malaysian context, macam last I pergi dengan Azam jumpa friends of Palestine. I pun instill my interface group. Kalau kita cakap pasal Palestine punya isu, dia terus akan keluar Palestine is Hamas. And basically they are both guilty. So they just drop the case like that. Israel bomb, Hamas also bomb. Okay, that's it. They are both terrorists or they don't want to know. I mean, that's a polite way of not wanting to talk about that thing. Even kalau macam Muslim masa dia jumpa millennial, dia kata Palestine is all Hamas. We don't want to get near to this Palestine issue. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I think the best response was made by Sinway of Hamas, the current Hamas leader, when the last time Israel was doing the bombing. Like he said, we're not violent people, we're not violent men. We don't enjoy shooting rockets at Israel, but we don't have a choice. They're bombing us. Gaza has been blockaded for 15 plus years. We don't have access to water, electricity. We're doing this because this is the only thing we can do. And this is same as what Nelson Mandela said in 1962 when he was prosecuted by the apartheid South African government at his Rivonia trial. He also said, we are not violent men. We don't enjoy doing this, but we tried peaceful protests, and the Palestinians also tried peaceful protests like the Great Return March in 2018. And when we do peaceful protests, we are just met with bullets. So we're doing this armed resistance because that's the only thing we have left.
All right.
And
Bun, nak respon sikit
Yeah.
Untuk jawab your
One
question
last
tu, satu je nak jawapan dia. 1987, 1987. You see, Hamas ni sangatlah muda rupanya. Hamas tubuh tahun 87, tapi isu Palestin tahun 48. Jadi apa-apa untuk kaitkan atau blame Hamas ni, again, fallacy, fake news, hasbara, kerja karut. That's it. Thank you, Bun.
Okay, thank you Azam. Okay, that's quite a simple answer. Hamas 87 selepas berapa tahun? 30 lebih tahun. Kalau kita dah negotiate 30 tahun benda tu tak ada hasil, setiap hari engkau di under military punya rule, engkau tak ada hak untuk bekerja, engkau tak ada hak tiap-tiap kali dia kena nak selongkar, dia boleh pergi rumah malam-malam, boleh tangkap dia pun budak pun masuk penjara. 800,000 orang dah masuk penjara Israel. No, basically the last thing tu kalau macam tadi macam saya duk terfikir kat malam tadi Roland we try, kalau macam Roland cakap tadi, we try to empathize. If you were to be Palestine, kalau once upon a time, even macam siapa Prof Nazari kata, even Boris Yeltsin, dia kata Nelson Mandela masa dia violently resistant, dia kata Mandela pun teroris. But now they say they're freedom fighter, you know. So, I mean, you tak boleh resist ke untuk orang yang ni, basically, dia punya crude rockets pun basically sebab your maruah. Roland, betul You dah humiliate, you tak ada future, you tak ada kerja, you nak pergi kalau doktor pun, dia tak ada,
Hamas mereka sendiri tu dah kata, if we have sophisticated rockets that don't target civilians, we'd use them. But this is all we have. And somebody dah kata, we tried peaceful protests. We tried international law and all that too. But Israel just tak hirau, tak protes, mereka tembak juga. International law mereka tak hirau. So what is left to the Palestinians?
Exactly. Kalau you punya abang kena bunuh, kalau you punya bapa kena bunuh, kalau you punya adik perempuan kena harass, kena strip, kena dengan all those checkpoint. Kalau you jadi doktor pun you tak ada kerja, Roland kerja pun tak ada gaji.
Doktor pun dibunuh. Like during ketika kami, when we were all locked down, Israel went to bomb Gaza. They bombed basically the house of the head doctor of the entire Gaza in charge of COVID.
Yeah.
He was killed with his whole family. His children, his grandchildren, all bombed up. And it's not like Israel doesn't know. Israel has the population registry for Gaza. They know who lives where. They knew that this was the house of the head doctor for COVID in the whole of Gaza, and they went to bomb it.
They just don't care. They have the whole registry of the whole of population in any parts of Israel or Palestine. They have the whole registry. They know. And basically all over Israel or in Palestine, they have plenty of CCTV. They have plenty of drones. Even ada satu Palestin perempuan, I think Afar, 17 years old, one of the talk dia cakap, basically Palestine is basically they are dead already. They are dead. But their dead are put on hold. In certain sense, apa ni cuba maksudkan, dia basically anytime dia basically dia dah mati dah. Dia boleh mati anytime. Just put on hold. So anytime Israel boleh hantar dia punya drone, dia boleh hantar dia punya roket, dia boleh hantar dia punya sniper, and they can be killed anytime. So I think that of our discussion on adakah Israel bukan sebuah negara apartheid. I think dalam bukti yang kita tunjukkan, I think it's quite clear. Yang bukti tunjukkan tadi bukan setakat Amnesty International. Tahun yang sebelum tu, tahun 2021, Julai 2021, Human Rights Watch pun telah mengeluarkan report sama, 220 page. Yang sebelum tu, tahun 2020, I think April, NGO Hak Asasi Manusia Israel sini, BT Salam, mengeluarkan yang sama. Dan sebelum tu ada 2020 Januari, ada Yesh Din, I think Israel punya NGO juga, yang telah mengatakan Israel adalah sebuah negara apartheid. Bukan kami cakap, inilah orang yang tak dikena-mengena, dan orang Israel sendiri melabelkan diri mereka, negara mereka sebuah negara apartheid. I think this supposed to be 4-0 lah. Kalau dia nak cakap tu just simply policy, just try to, I don't know, talk. But I think we should spread that, we should pressure them for them to go to the negotiating table, for them to, macam Ilan Papai cakap, terpulang kepada victim untuk dictate what are the terms of surrender. So otherwise they will never get peace. You can have your land, you can have your house, but you never get peace. You only get peace by doing the right thing, by doing the just thing. That is really a true peace that everyone and anyone can get. Betul Roland, I don't know Roland, tapi to me, peace is you doing the right thing, you doing the just thing. Do the right thing. With that, I think I thank you guys. Thank you for those who are watching. Don't forget to, subscribe, join our campaign to pressure any injustice, any part of the world. With that, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.